So some of you know that I spent some time living in Seattle, Washington before I went to seminary, before going into the ministry and becoming a pastor. And while I was there, I got to know my mom's brother, who I know as Uncle Pete. Now, my parents are here today, so it's a wonderful time to have some Keller family stories coming. This is actually Miller family, and it's just about my Uncle Pete, so there's no embarrassment for them. But my Uncle Pete has lived in Seattle my entire life for a very long time. And before I moved there, I had only seen him once every couple of years. So I didn't really get to know him well. He was always my uncle that lives in Seattle. But then living there, I got to know him a little better. And he and his wife are avid hikers. And so, of course, he took me on some hikes in the Pacific Northwest to see some pretty awesome mountain peaks. But the first hike that he took me on didn't go as planned. I was very excited for this hike. How many of you are hikers? Okay, so I hope that you will not be able to relate to this story because it didn't, as I said, didn't go as planned. My uncle he hikes all the time. He's been hiking most of his life. I was excited to have some one-on-one time with him, right? To be able to get to know him more, have some bonding time. And he has been such a huge hiker that even in his young age, he got caught in an avalanche on a hike and survived it and continues to hike to this day. He's well into his, in his 70s now. He still hikes with his wife. And he has lived most of his life near those mountains, so he knows them pretty well, and I was excited to experience all that he loves. But about a quarter of the way through this hike, we were following the trail, and Uncle Pete started to slow down. And he started looking around, and we'd move a little bit more, and then he would keep looking around, and then he stopped, and he said, "We missed the path that leads to the peak," right? We were going to the peak. And we missed the path. We don't know where it is. I missed it. I don't know where it is. So he started to lead me on a different path that really wasn't a path, so that we could find the path that goes to the peak. He decided to take a detour off of the beaten path. There was no, trail markings. And so in the process, I had a very good workout. And I got eaten alive by mosquitoes. It was very painful. And then 2 hours later, going through, just the bush of the mountains, no pathway, we found the right path. And then walking up a very steep incline of rocks, which you see on the screen, I felt very hardcore walking up those. We made it to the peak with a beautiful view of Mount Rainier. And so you might be able to see kind of the outline of Mount Rainier there above those tree lines. The photo doesn't do it justice, of course, it never does. But it was very, very beautiful. Now, what was funny then was that on the way back down from the peak, on the actual hiking path, we passed by this pile of rocks. And when we passed by that pile of rocks, Uncle Pete said, "Oh, that's the spot that shows us the path to the peak. We just didn't go far enough to see this pile of rocks that would lead us to the peak. Just had to walk a little bit farther instead of our 2-hour detour." So sometimes I think we take detours to get to the right destination, right? That happens on hikes sometimes, and it also happens in life. But sometimes I think we find surprises along the way. While we were off the beaten path, we did find this beautiful spot that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. And it was this beautiful blue lake. I took this picture while mosquitoes were biting me all over, but it was such a beautiful sight. Again, photos don't do it justice, but this was a place that many people had not seen, right? It was off the beaten path. There was no hiking path to it. It was just there in the middle of things. And so going off the beaten path led us to something beautiful as well. And I wonder if you've ever had moments like this, moments in which you felt like you were searching or waiting for something and you see something beautiful that you didn't even know existed. So today we're continuing on in our summer sermon series called Faces of Our Faith, and I've really been enjoying the exploration of certain people in our Bible that aren't often talked about, that can sometimes be overlooked. And so today we look at a woman named Anna, who could be seen as part of a sort of post-Christmas story. I wonder if when Brian was reading, your mind went back to Christmas, right? All of a sudden, oh, Jesus is 7 years old. He's been given his name. And this is happening right in Luke chapter 2, which is where we read it every Christmas Eve, where the story of Christmas is. So there's baby Jesus, Mary and Joseph, there's the angels and the shepherds. And at the very end of Luke 2, not at the very end of Luke 2, but at the end of what we read on Christmas Eve, verse 20, it says, the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all that they had seen and heard, just as it had been told to them. And that's it, right? That's Christmas. That's the very last thing that we read on Christmas Eve. But there's more. Anna is in chapter 2, the same chapter in which Jesus is born. So we read a good portion of it. Mary and Joseph bring Jesus as a baby to the temple in Jerusalem to be presented, since that is the Jewish custom. And while they're there, what we didn't read was that the Spirit of God calls a man named Simeon to the temple. And Simeon had been told by the Holy Spirit that he would not die until he saw the Messiah. And so Simeon is an old man, and he takes Jesus in his arms, and he says that he has seen salvation in his old age. You can look up Luke chapter 2 and read exactly what he says. I wanted to focus more on Anna, but this is a neat part of the story, because right after this then, we're introduced to Anna. And it's almost as if she's an afterthought. There's only 3 verses that we read about her life. That's all we have in this whole book, but she is important enough for Luke to mention by name. He didn't just leave her out. So here's what we know. We know that Anna is a prophet, right? And this means that she has a vision and an awareness about the future. But a prophet doesn't just see the future. They are extraordinarily in tune with God and with the work of God, so much so that they help others to see what God is doing as well and point to what God is going to do, right? And so a fun fact is that Luke only mentions one prophet in his whole book, and it's Anna. So throughout the Gospel of Luke, we really see he takes time to lift up women and put them at the center of the story. Anna and other women would be seen on the margins of society, right? But he lifts them up and puts them at the center of stories. And I think that's what he's doing here. Anna would be considered a woman on the margins of society because she's a widow. She was only married, as I told the kids, and as you heard, for 7 years before she was widowed, and she's now 84 years old. And we can assume that she has been a widow now for several decades. And back in that time, being a widow was a very vulnerable position. So much of the value of a woman lied in being able to be married and being able to have children, especially sons, and she didn't have any of that. And since Anna didn't have either of that, we can assume that she's very poor and she depends on the help of others to be able to survive. And so I think Anna's story can tell us 2 different things. It has a lot to tell us about getting older, and Anna's story also has a lot to tell us about waiting. Now, getting older and waiting are 2 things that I don't think we do very well. I speak for myself, also saying that I don't do that very well. So if you are in that box with me, I'm putting myself in there with you. So as I said, Anna is 84 years old, and some of you may be sitting there thinking 84 really isn't that old, right? If you're getting close to 84, you probably don't think it is that old, and you're right, but back then, 84, living to that long was a very big deal. Also, according to the Eastern Orthodox tradition, Simeon was 200 years old. Now, Luke doesn't tell us how old that he was, but we know that, like Anna, he had progressed in years. So I love this particular drawing of Anna, which you'll see on the screen, and it looks a lot like who? Mother Teresa, right? So the artist, Lisa Gwynn Garrity, writes this about the drawing. She said, when drawing the image, I referenced photographs of Mother Teresa because I imagine her, like Anna, a few centuries before, having eyes for the divine and devoting her entire life to pointing it out to others. Having eyes for the divine and devoting her life to pointing out the divine, to pointing out God to others. Anna reminds me of a woman named June, who was part of my first appointment, Park Avenue Church in Chambersburg. And she was only at my church in worship for a few Sundays before it was decided that it was no longer safe for her to drive. So she stayed at home, and I went to visit her. And June was widowed. She had never had any children, like Anna. And her nieces and nephews, though, took exceptional care of her. She was also a hoot. I think the first time I visited her in her home, she was talking about my first Sunday. My husband and I weren't married yet. He still lived in Maryland, and he was there my first Sunday to support me. And she said, I just feel like Richie is your sugar daddy. And I wanted to say, June, I don't think that means what you think it means. But she would say things like that that were just so off guard and unexpected, and you just love those kind of people, right? So after she stopped being able to drive, though, it wasn't long before it was decided that going to a home and into assisted living was best for her. And I still remember when I visited her, when she told me that she was going to be moving, and she was showing me a brochure of the nursing home. And what she said next surprised me, and I hope that I continue to remember it into old age when my children are deciding my future, right? But she said, Pastor Rachel, I don't want to go, but I know that I should go. And I know that God has something for me to do there. And I don't know what it is yet, but I can't wait to find out. Now, you need to know that June is 10 years older than Anna at this time. She was 94 years old. And at 94 years old, going to a nursing home where she would be cared for as a resident, she knew that God still had something for her to do, or some way for her to serve or feel fulfilled at 94 years old in a nursing home. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? So many people are going to a nursing home and think, well, that's just it. This is the end. Nothing for me. But June lived with an expectation and an excitement about what God could do in this new chapter of her life. A couple weeks ago, we talked about young people. I don't know if you were here. You remember the boy that fell out the window, right, because Paul was speaking too long, and we talked about lifting up young people, which is a very important thing for us to do. But I also want to talk about lifting up older people, because they're also an important part of the church. You are never, ever, ever too old for God to use you. The joy and the work of faith is ageless. Anna knew how to grow old with grace. And we see that in the ways that she waited. Anna's life included a lot of waiting. But as a prophet, she didn't spend her life trying to predict God's timeline for when the Messiah would come, right? She was waiting for the Messiah to come, as many people were at the time. Instead of trying to predict when that would happen, instead, she stayed close to the heart of God. Luke tells us she spent all of her time at the temple. She worshiped, she fasted, she prayed, and she was waiting. She was waiting for the Messiah to come. How many of you are good at waiting? No one is raising their hands. We're all bad at waiting, huh? We are impatient people, right? I think whenever we are waiting for something, our instinct is to ask God when the waiting will be over, right? We'll think if we're waiting for a job, God, when will this job open for me? When will an opportunity open for me? We might think, when will I finally find love after I've been lonely for so many years? When will my heartache be over? When will this relationship that is broken be repaired? When will they be healed, right? When will my grief stop hurting so much? Or what maybe many of us say is, when will we find peace in our country and in our world, right? When will that come? And I really do think that God can take all of that questioning. I am a firm believer that God wants to hear the deep desires and the feelings that are on our hearts. But I also love the way that Anna flips this question around. Instead of asking when or even why her circumstances are the way that they are, she seems to ask, how can I still remain faithful to God in this season of uncertainty? How can I still remain faithful to God in this season of uncertainty? And what might I learn in this season of waiting? And what can I still do right now in the meantime? Anna continued to worship even when the answers didn't come quickly to her. She prayed even when, I'm sure, there were a lot of times that she felt like God was silent in her life. And she served even when her circumstances didn't change. For decades, she lived that way. There are two kinds of times that are talked about in the New Testament in Greek. There's chronos time, and there's kairos time. So chronos time and kairos time. Chronos time is the linear quantitative measure of time, much like the time that we talk about today, the literal seconds or hours or weeks, minutes. But kairos time is a little more different. Kairos is more of an existential measure of time. It's a qualitative and thought of as seasons of time. And often it's talked about in the Bible as God's appointed time for something. And the thing about kairos is you never know when a kairos moment is going to arrive. So before Jesus was born, there was a lot of debate about when the Messiah would come, what the Messiah would look like or be like. And there really was no telling how God was going to act. But one thing was for sure was that God was going to act. First century Jews believed that God was going to come and set everything right in the world again, bring heaven to earth, right? But when that kairos moment came, the Messiah didn't come like a knight in shining armor to overthrow everything. He came as a baby with two very ordinary and poor parents. And we left this part out of our reading today, but as part of the presentation of Jesus in the temple, it was customary for the parents to bring an animal to sacrifice, and Mary and Joseph brought 2 turtle doves, just little turtle doves, and that shows that they didn't have the means to bring any kind of bigger or significant animal to sacrifice. That was not the expectation of anyone, right? For Jesus to come, for the Messiah to come as a poor baby. Jesus, though, fulfilled all of God's promises, but not in the way that people were expecting. But Anna knew. Anna saw baby Jesus, and she knew that he was the Messiah. Anna recognized Jesus because she had spent decades of her life sharpening her eyes to see the holy. She spent so much of her time praying and studying and worshiping so that she could recognize the divine. And when the divine came right in front of her as a baby, she did. She got it. She knew. Friends, I don't know what kind of season of waiting that you are in right now. Some of you might just be waiting today for the service to be over so that you can go to brunch. Your stomach might be rumbling. And if that's your only weight right now, I love that for you. But I think that perhaps all of us are waiting for something more than that. There are deep needs and struggles that are in this room, and I want you to know today that God didn't put any of those struggles in your life. Your suffering and your difficulty is not a part of the plan that God has for this world. But I also know that God doesn't waste anything. God can and will redeem everything through God's grace. Anna didn't spend her days anxiously waiting and wondering when the day would come. She didn't seem to even have a bad attitude because things didn't happen the way that she wanted. Instead, she drew close to God day after day, year after decade after decade. Her circumstances didn't define her faithfulness. Just because things were not going the way that she anticipated, it didn't define her faithfulness to God. She still leaned in and she served God in the meantime. I think we can spend so much of our time worrying. I personally can, and waiting, wondering when the day will come for whatever it is we're waiting for, right? But sometimes those detours that we take while searching for the peak can be full of mosquitoes, but they can also turn out to be beautiful explorations and discoveries. God faithfully carries us through seasons of waiting, shaping us into the very people that we are today. We don't know what the future holds, but the same God who is faithful to Anna is faithful to us as well. When she finally met Jesus, she went, right? She went around the temple and even left the temple just like the shepherds did. She stepped out knowing where those who were looking for redemption were and sharing what she had seen, saying the Messiah has finally come. So like Anna, where is our heart? Where are our hearts being led to help others toward a better future? What might God be calling you toward or to in the meantime, in this time of waiting? Friends, very soon we're going to share in communion together. And during communion, we take these very tangible elements of bread and juice, and God does something in the midst of them. We remember the life of Jesus, the ways that he poured himself out for so many, the ways that he poured himself out on the cross, but then how he also rose again. And we find new life in the midst of all of that. Through all of the struggles, through all of the difficulties, we're able to find new life in the process. So as we prepare to come to this table, I invite you to spend some time in prayer with me. And at the end of the prayer, you're going to see on the screens a prayer of confession that's going to come up, and that's a corporate prayer, a unison prayer that we can all pray together, not to feel guilty for anything, but just to know that God is with us. God hears us, and through all of our brokenness and difficulty, God is still forgiving us and welcoming us and offering us new life. So before that, though, we're not going to say that right away. Let's pray together, center our hearts together.